Okay, let's talk about the structure of your exam, some of the conditions for your exam, and some scheduling. The exam's on paper. The exam has 3 sections to it. One of the 3 sections, which is probably section 1, will have 1 question, and that question has multiple parts. These questions are structured not unlike the review problem questions, okay? In fact, they're very similar to the review problem questions. But section 1, or at least one of the sections, will have 1 part, which question has multiple parts, A, B, C, D, E kind of thing, and you are required to answer that question and all of its component parts, okay? The other 2 sections, which probably are sections 2 and 3, each have 2 questions, each question having multiple parts. You choose one of the 2 to answer. So if section 1 has 1 question only, you answer its section with all its component parts. If section 2 has 2 questions, you answer one of those 2, but you answer all of the component parts, A, B, C, D, sort of thing. Section 3 then would likely also have 2 questions. You would answer one of them and all of that 1 question's component parts. So that you're going to end up answering 3 questions and all of its component parts. If you decide, you opened up the test, you're looking at question number 2, or section 2, and the first question in section 2, you decide to start to answer it. You get a little ways down there and say, oh no, not this rabbit hole, or not this particular brand of hell, what was I thinking? Put a great big X through it so that I know not to grade it. Okay? Because if it looks like it should be graded, no matter how complete or incomplete it is, if you started it, I think I'm about to grade it, unless you've told me with a great big X, it's going to take up not just a little bit of the page, but a goodly part of the page that's going to encompass the part of the page that question sits on, I now know not to grade that. Okay? And then go on and answer the other one instead. I would encourage you, before you answer any of the questions at all, read the exam. Is that a hand bill?
Yeah. Are we graded on just the overall question of all of them, or is there different points for each sub-question?
There's going to be different points for each sub-question, and there's partial credit given. Okay. Let me give you an example. If you have a labor supply and labor demand equation, and I believe that you should be able to find L star and W star, you know how to do that, right? If you find that L star or W star first, and then you find the wrong L star, not because you used the wrong equation, you wrote everything down right, but in your calculations 2 times 2 equaled 5, it's probably going to cost you a tiny bit. It may have been a 5-point element, but it might cost you a point because of a math error. If you then go on to use that L star of 5 elsewhere in that same set, I'm not going to charge you points again. So you get dinged the first time that's wrong for whatever it's wrong. It's a math issue, you understood the concept, that's clear, but you just did the wrong math because you're in an exam. It costs you a little bit. If you get the wrong answer because you don't know what you're doing, well, that's going to cost you a lot more, right? But it should only cost you once as you use that particular data within that question set. What that suggests to you is that when I go through and grade these exams, if you don't come up with the answer I expect, then I will figure out how you came up with your answer, and I will use your answer in the next part of the question rather than mine, so that it doesn't keep costing you. If you get a test back from me, and it looks like you got dinged for something wrong the first time, and then you got dinged for using that wrong value again and again in the same question, let me know that is not my intent, and I'll make an adjustment. Okay? I don't give you back your exams, but after I've graded them, which I do with a red pen, and my handwriting's terrible, you've seen it on the board, so just beware, I go ahead and have them scanned by a color scanner, and I email you your scored exam. So I don't give the paper copy back, I don't carry them around with me, but you get your exam back. When we do the final at the end, I don't scan them back to you unless you expressly ask me to. Okay? You should bring a writing instrument, pen or pencils, your choice. If you could bring 2, where you have 2 different colors, that might be helpful to you. Okay? It might be helpful to me because it helps us differentiate. But that's up to you. I'm going to encourage you to use a pencil rather than a pen because it will shock you the number of times you may want to erase something, and hard to do with a pen. You can bring a small ruler. Doing the graphics a lot easier when you do a ruler sometimes, right? You can bring a calculator, writing instrument, ruler. You can't bring blank paper or paper into one of the exam centers, but I've told them that you're allowed some blank paper that they should be willing to give you, so you can make notes and stuff. They'll staple it to the thing, and that might be helpful for you. If I can't figure out how you're answering something, I sometimes will go through your note page to see if I can find what you were doing there. Okay, which also suggests then, if you believe you know the answer to something, don't just write down the answer and not how you got it, none of the equation, because if you were wrong in your belief and all you gave me was the answer, I can't tell how you got it, and I simply know it's wrong. If I can see how you got it and I see where you went wrong, and if it was a major error, well, that'll be costly. But if it was a very minor error, it may be very minimal cost. So show me how you get your answers. Don't work them out on the blank page that you've got and then transfer the answer over. Show me how you got the answers. Okay? I've given you 3 hours. The exam typically takes an hour and a half, an hour 40 minutes-ish for most students. Some will take longer. And so I've given you 3, but at 3 hours you'll be cut. Okay? You're having a problem with scheduling the testing center.
Yeah.
It might be because you'll notice that this exam is on Monday and Tuesday, and this testing center isn't open to do regular tests on Mondays and Tuesdays. So if you guys want to do your test on Monday or Tuesday evening, if you will email me and let me know that, I will be here personally to proctor the exam for you. Okay? I can't be here much earlier than about 5 o'clock. And I'll put an announcement out about that. So if you want to do it here and you want to do it on Monday or Tuesday evening, I'm happy to come and be the proctor since this center doesn't have a proctor for you. So you can still do it. That means you can't schedule it online, but you will have scheduled it with me by your email. Okay? The exam center up on main campus, I think, is open pretty much every Monday through Saturday. I think it's open from like 9 in the morning till like 9 at night, except for Saturday, which I think they close down at like 6 or 7.
When I scheduled 2 weeks ago, there's only a couple of spots left, so maybe that's why people are having issues. Is because
Could be.
The testing center is full.
And was that up at main campus or here?
Main
Yeah,
campus.
it could be. That's why I sent out that announcement earlier and said, guys, schedule your exams early. But I know it's even worse here. And we've never had this scenario here before.
Interesting.
Yeah, this, for some reason, it's really constrained here this time. But again, I'm happy to show up for those 2 evenings, or one, either one, or both if necessary, to proctor your exams, so you can take them. Okay?
I'm going to need to do that.
Sure. I'll shoot out an announcement or email about it here probably tomorrow, and just respond to it. Okay? I'm fairly critical when it comes to the scoring of the exams. Just know that, okay? I don't curve them, but then I've never really needed to either, okay? A few people in the class are going to come up with perfect or near perfect scores. And a few people in the class may struggle mightily. And the correlation typically is how much time they spent reviewing the material and in the videos and such. So just know that. What else would you like to know about structure and formula?
I guess just how would you recommend studying for it?
Good. I would go back through your review problems. You're going to find some of the questions are remarkably similar to your review problems. In fact, you're going to find some of the questions look like they came right out of maybe 2 different review problems. Because some of these things are just building upon the others, right? So all of this we just did with friction, you need to understand how to evaluate labor market model equations first. So there's going to be some things that look very similar, and that's not coincidental.
If I have an extra try available on one of the review problems and I go back and do it again, is that going to cause you to have to go back and grade those again?
If the date has passed for it, then it won't let you.
Okay.
So, but if the date hasn't passed, and if you were satisfied with your first try, then don't do that.
Okay.
Okay. I believe you have them, you have the questions and the answers available to you on Canvas after the review problems due. Print it out and then just do the questions again and compare your answers to the answers. That's one of the ways to think about it. Also, you're going to find that I have a midterm exam review page and link in the modules for Canvas. And I not only have all the review problems there for you, not the answers to questions, but I also have a whole series of what I call in-class problems that I developed for some other courses that are targeted to the exact same material. And you've got both the question and the answers on those. Okay? Yeah?
Are there any videos or modules you would recommend more than others to go back and watch?
Well, I don't know that I've watched modules 8 through 15. Yeah, probably not.
It's going to be more general knowledge than specific.
Well, that'll be specific, but it's,
Well,
yeah. I would say there's less here about the labor market, as in the first module, than probably the others. But if you don't understand what the labor force is, or labor force participation, etc., you're going to have a problem. So let's kind of start there, module 1. Okay? So module 1 is about the labor market. We define unemployment. We define unemployed. Somebody that's unemployed doesn't have a job, is looking for a job, and is willing to accept a job. That's somebody that's unemployed. Somebody that's employed, well, that's easy. They're employed. Doesn't mean they're full-time employed. They might be part-time employed. Doesn't mean they're employed at their highest and best wage. They're just employed, right? They may still be looking for another job and still be employed. So that can be a little confusing to people. The number of unemployed plus the number of employed is the number of people in the labor force. To find the labor force participation rate, we take the number in the labor force and divide it by the population, ages 16 through 65, in the general population. And it gives us some percentage, and that's the labor force participation rate. To find the unemployment rate, we take the number of unemployed and divide that by the labor force, and that gives us the unemployment rate. The employment rate, which happens to be 1 minus the unemployment rate, is going to be taking the number of employed and divide that by the number of people in the labor force. That will give you the employment rate. The unemployment rate and the employment rate should equal 100%. And honestly, Bailey, for the labor market, that's most of what you really need to make sure you've got a handle on. Okay? You might want to remember that there's 4 types of unemployment: structural, frictional, seasonal, and cyclical. What is structural unemployment?
Unemployment that caused by government policy?
Yeah, the structure of the economy, which is largely influenced by government mandates and policies, right? Yeah, exactly. So if we have unemployment because interest rates were increased by the Federal Reserve, making it harder for firms and consumers to spend money, then we probably have some level of structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment is that unemployment that is just the normal workings of a competitive market. Virtually, you're either employed today or you're not. Let's assume you're employed. You decide you're going to go home to China. You're from China, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Your accent sounded that way. You decide you're going to go home to China to find a job. Well, it's not that you got fired or laid off. It's just you just decided to go somewhere else. You may be unemployed during those 2 weeks as you transfer your household and look for a new job in China. It's not the structure of the economy, not because of a season. It's just the normal transactional flow in a marketplace. Seasonal unemployment is pretty easy to understand. If your job's connected to a season and seasons change, pretty good chance you lost your job. And if you're unemployed because of that, it's seasonal. Cyclical has to do with the up and down movement of the business cycle. And we know the business cycle kind of runs like this. And when we're in economic expansion, people are can more easily get jobs, and the employment rate goes up, unemployment goes down. When we're in contraction, then we know it's harder to find a job, fewer people have jobs, unemployment rate goes up, the employment rate goes down. It's because of the business cycle, normal expansion, contraction, the sine wave. Because try though we might, We've never figured out how to just have a nice, steady movement through an economic market. Because we're economic agents, and we have these irrational preferences sometimes. So that's really everything that you would need to know out of Module 1. Module 2 has to do with labor market marginality. Courtney, could you describe to me just very briefly the concept of marginality? Are you able to do that? It's okay if you can't. You can cry on it. Lindy will back you up.
I want to say something, but I'm not going to.
Okay. Well, let Lindy say it, and then you can tell us if it's right. Lindy, do you recall the very basic concept of marginality?
Let me look back. I don't off the top of my head.
Okay. Virgil? Okay, it's my turn then. All right, so the concept of marginality is the changes we see when we add one unit, or to take away one unit from something. The marginal changes we see when we change the number of input units to production in this case. And we're focused on labor as the units, right? So when we increase the number of labor units by even one, how does it change the productivity? How does it change the revenue product? How does it change the expense? Well, we have some relations we need to define. Marginal product of labor is equal to the change in the quantity of output from labor's production divided by the change in the labor units. Okay? That's the marginal product of labor. And Q is the quantity of units being produced by this individual's labor, or the environment the individual is working in. The marginal revenue product of labor is the marginal product of labor times the price of the unit being produced and sold. Q is quantity of the good being output. P is price of the good being output and sold. You heard me talk about this as labor's contribution to the firm's revenue. So marginal revenue product of labor can be defined as labor's contribution to the firm's revenue. We know that a general market condition for optimization is when marginal expense of labor is equal to the marginal revenue product of labor. Marginal expense of labor is equal to the change in the total cost of labor divided by the change in the units of labor. And the total cost of labor is equal to L times W. Well, if this is a general condition, which if you know much about economics generally, you might think of that as being similar to marginal revenue equals marginal cost for the whole firm. But this is just the part of the firm we're focused on, and that's the labor input part. What's a more competitive market condition?
Question real quick.
Yeah.
ME of L is equal to MRP of L. Is that always, or is that only?
No, that's when we are at optimal conditions.
Okay, optimal.
And with optimal conditions, we might say is the zero profit condition, which means that on the one unit, the unit that brought us here, if we introduce one more unit of labor, then we believe the expense of labor will become greater than the revenue from labor, in which case we've designed an operating loss. It's hard enough to make money in business. Don't design a loss, right? They come all by themselves sometimes, all right? So we want to have the number of labor units that we employ be at the point at which these two are equal to each other. And remember, we went through tables on this.
So if ME of L is greater than MRP of L, you've got too many workers.
Let's see. That is, so too many workers. That's probably true.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the expense of labor is more than the revenue.
You got too many of these guys. That means the MP of L is going down, and this probably is not, because it follows labor supply. Okay? So this is a general condition. But when we're in equilibrium and a competitive market, we know that the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the wage. Well, how do we know that? When it's very competitive, when there's lots and lots of firms out there trying to hire amongst lots and lots of workers, then those workers have choices as to which firm to go to. They're going to go to the firm that pays them the most. A firm can't afford to pay them more than their marginal revenue product, right? So the workers and firms will bid up to where the wage is equal to the marginal revenue product. The firm can't pay more than that without losing money, right? So it stops there. So that's a competitive market condition. Similarly, when the marginal expense of labor is equal to the wage, it's also a competitive market condition. And when you think about this, we haven't talked a lot about marginal expense of labor. We're going to when we deal with the unit on monopsony. And by the way, I think in the section on friction, I defined monopsony for you and a couple of other conditions that might cause friction. I think you should pay attention to those, but only to help set you up for the next modules that we go into, to make those modules a little bit easier to digest. When the marginal expense of labor is equal to the wage, well, that makes sense to us, but only because how we think about the next step in this. If MRP of L is equal to W and ME of L is equal to W, that means MP of L, or MRP of L, is equal to ME of L because of the transitive properties. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? So both of these are competitive market conditions, and absent other influences, like the balance condition, which we talked about a little bit ago, right at the beginning of class. And Lindy, if you need more on the balance condition, then it's at the very beginning of the video that I'm about to post. Okay? So we talked about it at the beginning, or after we're done, you're welcome to ask me. Any of you that would like to see it again can do that. Absent other influences, we want to hire the number of workers that is commensurate with the point at which we have this equilibrium. That is where we're having the greatest total profit for the firm. Well, we see this very often through a table where you've got some Q, some L. You can then measure some MP of L. You can measure MRP of L. You can then think about TC of L. You can think about ME of L. And you would have some numbers here. So let's say at 10 workers, we know they produce 100 items. At 20 workers, we know they produce 180 items. At 30 workers, we know they produce 240 items. And we know that the price of our good is 3. So whatever it is we're producing is 3. Okay? And let's say in this case, we're in a competitive market and the wage is fixed at 10. When I say fixed, it's not fixed because of mandate. It's that this firm, and when we're looking at this kind of table, we're thinking about a firm, not a market of firms. But this wage, if it was W star, if that's what fixed it, if you will, then it's the market that set it. And as far as this firm is concerned, it is fixed because the firm can't change it if we're in a competitive market, right? Well, in this case, you might argue that if there are 0 workers, there's 0 quantity. And that might be true, but you're introducing some details that are not in evidence. Maybe the equipment used, it can just run on its own and produce just a little bit. Okay? So don't make that supposition unless you're given that supposition. In which case, this first value for MP of L, we don't know what it is, do we? Because we don't know what these numbers changed from to get here. Okay? The next number we know. Change in quantity, so 80, divided by change in labor of 10. So I think our marginal product of labor is 8. And in this case, I might have to change the W here in a minute. The next change is going to be change in quantity. I think that's a 60 change. Change in labor is 10. We have 6. Okay. And so if we have price of 3, well, again, we don't know this value, but 8 times 3 is 24. 6 times 3 is 18. Okay. We know that here, I think we'll be able to use the wage of 10. I think we'll be okay. Here, if we've got a wage of 10 and labor of 10, total cost of labor would be here 100. We don't know the marginal expense here because we don't know where he changed from, right? But we can make a supposition in a moment, you'll see. Here, we know that we have 20 times 10, so it's 200. Here we have 30 times 10, it's 300. Well, the change in the total cost of 100 divided by the change in the labor of 10 is 10, right? The change in the total cost of 100 divided by the change in the labor of 10 is still 10. Setting up our understanding that when we have a competitive market and the wage set by the market, and it becomes effectively constant, the marginal expense of labor is also constant at the wage. Which, when the marginal expense of labor equals the wage, you know you're in a competitive market. Okay? Well, we can continue this on. I'm not going to keep doing numbers here. But if we continue this on to higher quantities of output and yet higher numbers of workers, you can see that at a point we're going to get to where the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to or approximately 10, right? Because as the number of workers is going up, the productivity is going down, product of labor is going down, it's only going to take, there's a 6 spread there, so the next one would be 12. At the next one, we're going to cross the point at which 10 was involved. But in this case, we're not going to actually hit exactly 10, are we? Because this would go, if we kept going, it might be instructive for us to do so, so let's. If we go to the next one, so let's say that was 60, this is 40, this is 280 and 40, and then this is 310 and 50. I think we're probably going to cross it. So here we're going to have 4 and times 3 is 12. We're going to be at 410. The next one is going to be 30. So we're going to be at 3 times 3 is 9. And it's going to be at 500. And this will still be at 10, right? Well, we aren't at a point where the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the marginal expense of labor. Here are we. Marginal revenue product is greater than marginal expense, but then the very next item is where the marginal revenue is less than the wage. Somewhere between, we can surmise, 40 and 50 workers, somewhere between 280 and 310 units of output, there is a numeric point of workers, it's probably a fraction of workers, where marginal revenue product is equal to 10 and marginal expense is equal to 10. When you can see that that condition can exist within the framework we're looking at, you know you have a competitive market. It's just that you're being fed information such that it doesn't immediately show up as an equality. If this was a frictional market, you wouldn't even be able to surmise how that condition could come about. You'd see yourself diverging away from that condition rather than converging towards it. Okay? And in this case, how many workers would we hire? I would say we don't want to hire 50, in which case our marginal revenue from them is 9, our marginal expense is 10, we know we're in trouble, right? I would stop at 40, and if I had a choice between accepting a loss and accepting a surplus, because 12 is greater than 10, I'm going to accept a surplus, right? I much prefer profits than losses. Losses will take me into bankruptcy. Profits may not be completely optimal, but bankruptcy is yet less still. Does that make sense? And you've seen examples of that in at least one of the review problems. So this is kind of what you need to think about with marginality. Oh, we might talk about marginality in terms of not having the equilibrium conditions, such that we want to think about if the only thing we're talking about is marginal product of labor, how many workers do we hire? Well, in this case, if we weren't dealing with any of this, if we were only looking at marginal product, I think that we could easily see that not very long we're going to get to a marginal product of labor of 0. We would stop, if we aren't dealing with some of the financial aspects, if it's just productivity alone, we would quit hiring workers at the point that the marginal product of labor was equal to 0, or just barely greater than if the next one was less than 0. Because it doesn't mean that we're producing less when we get to 0. It means we produced as much as we possibly could. If we hired 1 more, or in this case 10 more, and it became negative, now it wouldn't be adding to our productivity, it would be taking away. And you would start to see the quantity, instead of rising at a decreasing rate, it would start to fall at an increasing rate. Any questions about marginality?
So basically, it's more important that the MRP of L is equal to the ME of L than that the NP of L is equal to 0.
If we are dealing with the financial constraint as well, if you're given information about ME of L and MRP of L,
Yeah.
or just MRP of L and wage, which is the ME of L in a competitive market, right? Then that's the condition you're subject to,
Okay.
not the overall productivity condition. Yeah, good question. Like somebody sent me an email, Catherine, maybe it was you,
It was
about
me.
that.
Yeah.
Kind of just jump on a question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you have this, think about it this way. When you have a budget constraint that enters into your equation, you must be subject to your budget constraint. We can't buy things we can't afford with our budget. Okay? The next section was evaluating labor market models. And that, honestly, is simply about having a labor demand equation and a labor supply equation and setting them equal to each other. Are any of you at the least bit uncomfortable in being able to find W star and L star with 2 of those equations? Okay. Let me then talk very briefly about them and not go into a lot of detail. I'll just put up a couple of real simple equations. LS is equal to -10 plus 3W. LD is equal to 15 minus 2W. I don't know where this is going to work out for W star and L star, but I think it'll be plausible. Okay? And if I'm going to set those equal to each other, which I know I can do, because at a point, labor demand and labor supply are going to be the same thing, and they will be equal to each other at that point. Obviously, we're in a Cartesian coordinate world here, where this is the positive space. This would be the negative space. This would be the negative positive, I believe, and this would be the positive negative. We can play in any one of those spaces. It's just that it's not plausible to do so. I don't immediately understand what negative labor is. I don't immediately recognize negative wage. Oh, you heard me talk about them a little bit in the videos, but they're unusual, okay?
So we don't really need to worry about them for the...
I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I would think that if I showed you a labor demand, let me redo this. If I showed you something where we had labor demand coming through like this and labor supply coming up like this, such that at some positive number of labor, we had a negative wage, I would like you to try to describe to me what you think this might represent. You wouldn't have to do a lot of calculating, probably. You wouldn't have to go into paragraphs of description. So Courtney, we're looking at this. a positive number of workers at our equilibrium, because here L star is positive, but a negative wage, W star in this case is negative, what does that represent? Could be, right? Yeah.
That's when they're trying to keep people out of the labor system, right?
Not necessarily, but not necessarily. I think I know where you're going, so let me reference it in a moment. But in this case, this might be a volunteer. This might be a amateur musician, community theater actor. I love playing basketball. I hope someday to make it into the bigs, but right now I play for free. And I know I don't play for free. I don't play my instrument for free. I don't volunteer for free. It costs me time and money to volunteer, right? I had to buy my basketball and my shoes. I had to buy my racket. I had to buy my guitar or my clarinet. Maybe I even had to get a uniform or something. So it cost me. It cost me. It's a negative wage. But there is a market for them. I went to a symphony not too many nights ago. It was wonderful. Not a single person there other than the director was making any money. All the musicians were there for free. It cost them. So that's an example. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna give an example of that,
Ah.
but you got it.
But I took it over and I apologize.
I'll be all right.
So sometimes we want to disincent people to want to be in a marketplace, right? Such that we might think about a negative wage as being the disincentive. So is there demand for criminals? Well, yeah, I kind of think there is. I think there's a demand in almost every economy for prostitution, right? For lots and lots of different reasons. Is it illegal in most economies? Sure. If I'm a pimp, apparently there's a demand for me because in my market, pimps organize prostitutes and take a percentage of their wages. Prostitutes don't necessarily get incarcerated, but you catch a pimp and they do, because they're usually abusive and all kinds of other things as well, right? So there's a wage that they might be paid up front or initially, but if they get caught, the cost is extraordinary. You're going to be incarcerated. Is the net cost to them positive or negative? We can surmise that it can be negative, right? Legal fees, 7 years in jail, never able to vote again, not able to get a decent job, getting beat to pieces in jail or whatever else might happen to them. I think you could say that there's a cost to them that may have possibly been greater than the wage. That may be a negative cost to try to disincent and keep people out of this market. That might be an example of what you're referring to. Criminality could be modeled this way. Okay? So here, I'm going to go ahead and find my W star and L star. Negative 10 plus 3W being equal to 15 minus 2W. So I know I've got 5W is equal to 25. W is equal to 5, and that happens to be W star, right? So Virgil, if I have W star, how do I find L star?
Just plug W star to either the labor supply or the demand.
How is it that you know I can use either one?
Well,
They're different, aren't they?
Well, because too slow, but set equation at a same point. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
They look different, but if we have a wage right here, they are the same thing. So I put in either one. So I'll use LD. LD is equal to 15 minus 2 times 5, or 10, or it's equal to 5. So that's now L star. So I've got L star is equal to 5, and W star is equal to 5. Okay? By the way, I know that this supply curve could possibly cross the y-axis, the wage axis, or it could possibly cross the L-axis, right? And still be upward sloping either way. Catherine, do you know how I can look at this equation and immediately tell which axis it crosses?
Well, if you say that the labor supply is 0.
It's easier.
Yeah.
It's easier. But it's because of what you're about to tell us. Okay? So I just want to make it easy for you guys. If that's negative, if
Oh,
the
then
constant is
it's
negative,
negative.
it's going to cross the W axis.
Okay.
If the constant's positive, it's going to cross the L axis. Now, but go ahead and finish what you're starting to tell us.
Yeah, you just put 0 in for labor supply and then solve for W. Right?
Actually, I think you do it differently. I think you put 0 in for W and solve for LS, in which case you know
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm thinking that way.
that it's going to be
Okay,
out
yeah.
here someplace in the negative territory, right?
Yes.
If LS is -10, -10 lives out here somewhere, it's going to cross that axis. But easier still, if it's a negative constant in the labor supply equation, it will cross the W axis. Yeah,
So if there's a negative wage, or sorry, negative labor supply,
out here.
never mind, where would the reservation wage be?
Ah, good question.
Is that still where it crosses the
Still where it
x-axis?
crosses, right there,
Okay.
right there. The reservation wage is any wage above this intercept value. So let's find the intercept values. We've got that, but we need to finish the model. So let's find them. We know that we are at the 0, 0 nexus right here. So if we're on the wage axis, labor is 0. Or if we're on the labor axis, wage is 0. So that helps us find our axis intercepts, such that we can say for LS, when L is 0, we have 0 is equal to -10 plus 3W. 3W is equal to 10. W is equal to 3 1/3. And when W is equal to 0, then we have LS is equal to -10 plus 3 times 0, such that we've just defined these 2 points, -10 and 3 1/3. And that 3 1/3, it would be commonly thought of as our reservation wage. We reserve our labor until the wage reaches more than 3 1/3. Apparently we have alternatives to help support us. It's not worth us giving up an hour of leisure for only 3 1/3, is what we're saying. Okay. Same thing here for labor demand. So for LD, we're going to say when L is equal to 0, then 0 is equal to 15 minus 2W. 2W is equal to 15. W is equal to 7.5. When W is equal to 0, LD is equal to 15 minus 2 times 0, or 15. So now I know that out here, that number is 15, and this number is 7.5. Notice the extraordinary accurate proportionality of this graphic and the perfect slopes of each of those curves. Right? There is none. Okay? I'm not going to suggest that this is pretty. I am going to tell you, don't consume your time budget when you take an exam to go ahead and do all your little hatch marks of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 100. We're going up here all the way through 100, and then start to work on this. If you show me a supply curve that's upward sloping, and you give me its intercept, and you give me the weight, W star and L star, if you show me a demand curve that is downward sloping, you give me its intercepts, there should be 2 of them, and similarly I have my W star and L star, and if you label the curves LS and LD, label the axes L or labor, W or wage, you have given me all the details of that particular model I need to see. Don't consume your budget being an artist. If you want to do me a favor and print neatly, thank you. If you want to do me a favor and use a ruler to create a straight line, thank you. You're going to find that on the exam, when I need you to give me, or once you give me a graphic model, I actually have some little grid marks that are kind of light on the page. And so you can you know the area to put the graphic in, and you can have those kind of go by a little bit. Don't forget to draw the axis. Some people will do this thinking, well, he's given this to us. This bottom here, that must be the L-axis, that must be the W-axis. And they start drawing lines and you put numbers up. And if you don't give me the axes, I don't know that you know the relationship with the axes. Okay? So, and honestly, we figured out intercepts, equilibrium, drew the graphic model. That is the evaluating labor market model elements, and you use them again and again and again, not just in that section, but virtually every section we're going to deal with except for distributional inequalities, income inequality. Okay? And that's module 3. Any questions? I know that you said initially, no, you didn't have any questions about this, but this video is going to everybody else as well that may have questions, so I felt compelled to do this. Also, if you do have issues with this, whether it's here, those of you that are here, or those of you that are just on the video, if you have questions or issues with this, for heaven's sakes, get with me before you take the exam. It's going to kill you on the exam if you don't understand how to do this. Okay? And the second half of the term will be even more painful still. Okay, so the next module is labor demand. Let's say that I've got labor demand of, excuse me, 37 minus 4W. I know it's going to give me a model that's going to look like this. LD, L, W. I know that's 37. It's 37 divided by 4. Boy, I chose a lousy number. Well, not too bad, 9 1/4. It's going to look like this. Okay? How do I envision a shift versus a movement with respect to this labor demand curve? Bailey?
A movement's along the line, and a shift's can be either in or out.
So I have a initial level of labor and wage, and a shift is going to be where I am still on the curve, but my point in the curve changes.
Right, a shift or movement.
This would be a movement,
Okay.
okay? I'm moving along the curve, but the curve has not shifted, okay? Catherine, what variable changes will motivate a movement along the curve?
Change in W or L.
Yeah. If my L moves to L plus, I know my wage will move to W plus, right? Or if my wage moves to W minus, I know my L moves to W minus, or L minus. It's as easy as that. Movements along the curve are motivated exclusively by independent changes in W or L, period. If labor supply changes, and that change in supply, which is change in number of people willing to work at a particular job in a marketplace for a particular wage, if labor supply changes, it may result in a change in L star and W star, but it didn't start with a change in L star and W star, did it? Okay. So that would cause a shift of labor demand, not a movement along it. You have to think about the primary motivators of whatever is going on here. Okay. If interest rates in a marketplace increased, would that cause a shift or a movement of the demand curve?
A shift.
Okay, I agree. Let's think it through. Interest rates increase. Firms are the ones that demand labor, right? Interest rates increase. It's more expensive for firms to borrow. It's more expensive for them to borrow. They then have to increase the price of their goods. By that additional expense, they increase the price of their good. What happens to the demand for the good? Goes down. Price goes up, demand goes down for consumer demand, right? If that's the case, if we demand fewer goods, do we need more or less people to manufacture the good? We need less. Labor demand shifted in and to the left. What if the price of oil goes down? Let's say we're manufacturing plastic bottles. Price of oil goes down. Oil is an input to the manufacture of plastic itself, and oil is an input to the transporting of the bottles to consumers, retailers, distributors, etc. So it's less expensive now to manufacture and deliver those. If it's less expensive, we can suppose that there are going to be more of them demanded by consumers. If there's more of them demanded, we must need more workers to produce them, such that when the price of oil goes down, labor demand shifts out and to the right. Does that make sense? You can theorize any change, a change in W or a change in L, and know whether it creates a movement along or a shift up. And if it's not a change in W or a change in L, if it's a change in anything else, bless you, then it creates a shift of the curve rather than movement along. Okay?
Are there multiple choice questions on the?
None.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be.
Yeah. And so I said it's like the review problems. Obviously, the review problems have sometimes there's a multiple choice, but it's not. You're going to be writing things the whole time. And that's interesting to answer another element of that as well, Bailey. So there will be a couple of questions in here where you'll have an opportunity to explain rather than simply calculate and graph. Okay? I'm not talking about a 3-page essay. I'm talking about a very short paragraph or a sentence. For example, here's one. Why are labor demand curves downward sloping? I think it's very possible you'll see this question. Virgil?
Because diminishing productivity of labor.
Right. Marginal labor, the diminishing law of marginal productivity or diminishing law of returns. I see some really good answers, by the way, to that question when I've asked it in the past, that are multi-paragraphs and they're eloquent. They include graphs, they include equations, etc. And the person took 15 minutes of their 3-hour or 2-hour whatever budget instead of simply writing law of diminishing marginal returns. Both of them are perfectly acceptable answers. One of them took about 5 seconds, one of them took 15 minutes. So just be smart, okay? I've suggested to you that the labor demand curve in a competitive labor market is identical to the marginal revenue product of labor curve. How do I show you that? How do I get to that equationally? Let's assume that this is our labor demand curve. If I want to find the marginal revenue product of labor curve, I can do it. Yeah.
It was using slope, right? Changing
Well, we
the slope
get to
and-
the slope, but it's using a rule that lets us get there.
Is it, you just,
What's the rule? Do you remember?
well, the MRP of L is equal to the wage, so just put it
Yeah.
in for the
If this is a perfectly competitive market, then W is equal to MRP of L, right? Such that I have LD is equal to 37 minus 4 MRP of L. Well, if it's an MRP of L curve, not a labor demand curve, we're going to normalize on MRP of L, right? We're going to isolate that as a variable. So we're going to add 4 MRP of L to each side of the equation and subtract LD, or just L, we'll call it, from each side. And to get rid of the 4, we're going to say MRP of L is equal to 37 fourths, which I think is what, 9 1/4? I think? 9 1/4 minus 1/4 L. And now we have a marginal revenue product of labor equation, which can identify a marginal revenue product of labor curve. It's going to be the exact same curve. But now we know specifically what its slope is, don't we? We know it's downward sloping. We already knew it was downward sloping, but it didn't have a slope of -4. It has a slope of -1 in a rise over run scenario. So for every -1 rise, so for every 1 fall in wage, we have a positive L run of 4. Slope of 1/4, or 0.24. Let's see. What questions might you have about labor demand? Hard to imagine how I can drone on for a couple of hours in videos for something I can explain in 10 minutes in live, right? It's because you already have seen the videos and done the work.
Question.
Yeah.
So that 9 1/4, does that go on there? This is like me being dumb about knowing how to graph.
Oh, how would you graph it?
Yeah.
So remember here, if you remember back to our W and L environment, this was 9 1/4 and this was 37.
Oh,
Right.
so it's just finding the slope at that point for the MRP of L.
Yeah, and if you took a look at this, 37 divided by 9 1/4 is 4, right? So for every 1, we have 4. That is a decline. We can find our intercepts. If W can be equal to MRP of L, and they're both dollar denominated, this axis could be a W, could be an MRP of L axis, and or a W axis. Both of them could come up, could show here, couldn't they? Because they're both dollar denominated. Is that a question, Courtney? You thinking about asking one? Maybe ask one now? You don't want to ask one? Okay. Let's talk about the labor-leisure model of labor supply. Labor-leisure trade-off model. Where we have leisure and labor, or you might have labor and leisure. And if leisure leads the way, we have 16 and 0, and 0 and 16.
Is the 16 always a constant?
These numbers are always constant because we make the assumption. Now, you could theorize it as being different, but for a market where we make the assumption that human beings need an 8-hour regeneration cycle, then the most we can put in labor or leisure in a day is 16 hours because we have a constrained 24-hour day.
Okay.
Now, if you're fit, love to work, etc., maybe you're okay with a 6-hour regeneration cycle. I'm okay with a 6-hour regeneration cycle. I don't need 8 hours of sleep. So my numbers would be different, but if we're talking generally for a population, 16 is constant. Yep. So if this is my model, my graphic model, I have some dollar value of wage income or money that's coming into the household to do some things, right? And if I know what my wage is, and say my wage is equal to 10, and if I put in 16 hours of leisure, how many dollars of wage will I receive? 0. 16 hours of leisure. So if I got 16 hours of leisure, I got 0 hours of labor, I got 0 wage, which is why this point is on the 0 axis. But if I put in 16 hours of labor, then I can take 16 hours of labor times the $10 wage. It's going to show up here about 160, not about 160, but exactly 160. And that is my budget curve. So as a worker making $10 an hour, I can earn 0, or I can earn 160, or anything in between if my hours of labor and leisure are variable. This is counterintuitive for a lot of people. I want you to no longer think about you working for a wage. Lindy, you don't give up an hour, you don't give an hour of labor to an employer for a wage. That's counterintuitive, right? Catherine, do you remember what you give up an hour, what you get paid for?
Now the leisure that you sacrifice.
Yeah, you're giving up leisure. Because if you're at labor, you're not at leisure. So we get paid not to provide labor, we get paid to give up leisure. And you might say, oh, okay, that's just very theoretical, but I promise you, if you kind of work it through in your mind and think about it, that's exactly what you do.
Okay,
Please.
so I have a question about that. So like I know somebody that made a lot of money, but they had a really stressful job, and they were so stressed out at their job that they decided they wanted to switch jobs where they made a lot less money,
Uh-huh.
but they weren't as stressed.
Yeah.
So how does that, like, because
I
technically
love
they're
that.
selling their leisure for less, but it's
I don't think they are.
I don't.
Because those leisure hours, when that person was not working at his high-paid job or her high-paid job, let's say that they worked an average of 10 hours a day, not 12 hours a day, high-stress job. In the remaining 4 hours, were they able to be completely at leisure, or did the effects of the stress bleed over into their otherwise leisure hours?
Okay, that's
I'll
fair
argue
enough.
it bleeds
Right.
over. Bleeds into their households, their families, their marriage, their social life, their physical life, bleeds over. So I think that's the argument.
Okay.
Yeah, good question though. I've never had anybody ask me that, but it's a really interesting concept to think about. Okay, so Lindy, you're this worker. Let's say that's this is wage in thousands of dollars per month. Is that fair? Okay,
Thank you.
we're better now?
Yes.
Okay, you thought I was assigning you a $10 an hour wage, you were going
Yeah,
to smack me?
I'm not gonna have it.
Yeah, no, I was pretty sure that was true. I could tell by the look on your face, if nothing else. So this is you, and wages in tens of thousands, okay? If that's the case, and you are allowed to work 1 hour, 16 hours, half an hour, 12 and a half hours, whatever number you want, how do you decide how many hours you're going to work, or how many hours of leisure you're going to give up?
What's my budget?
Well, your budget is defined along the curve, so I think what you're saying is your tastes and preferences that require a certain budget to afford. Okay. Let's assume for a minute that we identified that you're kind of a material woman, and it's 120. How do we identify the number of hours? Well, we've got $120 divided by $10, which is our 12 hours. So we got 12 labor, we got 4 leisure, and we now know exactly how much leisure she's giving up for that wage. Because let's face it, $10,000 a day or an hour can give up a lot of leisure, right? What if instead of this scenario playing out, what if Lindy has a $100 per day endowment? So some amount of money that she receives just because she exists. It either came as an inheritance or she invested a bunch of money. Maybe she owns some real estate that pays a rent regardless of whether or not she's active. She owns some oil wells. I mean, who knows what happened. Oh, she developed a patent for some technology and simply leases that to firms in the public sphere or for a pharmaceutical. Okay. How many hours do you have to work each day, Lindy, to get that $100? Oh, she's not paying attention.
No, I'm
Okay.
thinking about, anyways. my
Okay,
brain
you
just
think about the
drifted to,
oil well?
No,
Or was it the pharmaceutical? that you
the
got
farms,
patent?
and I was thinking about how many hours of labor I work until they find out that I was a scam and I'm lying about
Okay, all right,
my
very good.
pharmaceutical technology, and then I go to jail forever.
Okay. So if you have...
0 hours
Thank you.
of work.
So we know in this case, 0 hours of work, she still has 16 hours of leave. And by the way, that's a straight line. Okay? All right. If that's the case, Virgil, now what happens to her budget curve?
The budget curve moves up.
It does, up, or you might say shifts out to the right. It's going to have the same effect. What's going to be the intercept point on the currency axis?
260.
260. Courtney, do you know why?
Because it's $100 endowment.
Yeah. So we start with a $100 endowment, to which we can add 16 hours of labor at $10 per 160, gets us to 260, such that the budget curve now looks like that. Okay. Well, again, let's come back to Courtney. And let's assume that Courtney simply needs the $120 a day. That's her criteria. So at that same 120 a day, $100 endowment, $20 more than the endowment, so she only had to work 2 hours to get it. She worked 2, she had 14 hours leisure, and she still has the exact same budget. But would we argue that she has greater satisfaction and utility in her life now? Sure, because she got that same budget and got more leisure. Think about an indifference curve.
Except if you find utility in labor, then
Well,
I
good
guess you
question.
would choose.
Yeah, we would be arguing that she gets more because she has the same amount of money and more leisure. If she had the same amount of money and more labor, and if she preferred labor to leisure, you might argue the same thing. If she preferred labor to leisure. But I think she's evidence that she prefers, at some dollar value, leisure to labor, right? Is that a hand? No, okay. So if we think about Lindy's budget or utility curve, it comes through like this, and we're going to say this is you, Lindy. And on that curve, she has the same level of happiness at any point. She's just as happy at any one of those red dots. But once her budget is shifted out, she can afford more happiness, can't she? We're just about done, Bailey, I promise. So you, Lindy, prime. Because now, at the same dollar value, she has more leisure, she's happier, she's still happy at the same level on this curve at any point, but she's happier than she was on this curve. Her utility curve, her indifference curve, is shifted out and to the right. You might think it was up and to the right. It's more accurate to think of it out to the right. This is the basic construction of the labor-leisure trade-off model. And we can talk about it in a number of different ways, and we do in the videos. Do you guys have any questions about the utility of this model and how we might think about it? Okay. With that, I think this evening we've touched on every concept and type of metric that you're likely to see on the exam. Admittedly, we've probably touched on some that you won't see, but we've touched on lots that you will. And because you have a choice in those two sections as to which question to answer, if you end up seeing a question you think, oh no, not that question, that was the one I've been praying that he would not ask, you have some degree of freedom so you don't have to answer that one. It wasn't all that many years ago I was a student. I think you might know I finished my doctoral work in 2000, well, the end of 14, graduated in April, May of 15. And I remember very much what it's like to walk into an exam, in fact, high-stakes exams for me, and to see a question that I've been begging and pleading inside of myself would not be there. I had the rest of it dialed in, but that one was plaguing me. I don't think that separates an A student from something else. So you guys have some degree of freedom on this. The exam won't be easy, but it won't kill you. Okay? All right, with that I think we're clear.